A virtual welcome to the Riverdale Jewish Center for the third installment of our legacy series, processing the lives, the contributions, and the legacy of three of the great scholars, speakers, Jewish leaders, and teachers of our generation. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, we have had the special privilege of studying about Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb and Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichronam Livracha, two outstanding speakers, teachers, leaders who we knew so incredibly well, and beginning to process what their legacies are and what their legacies will be for us and for the Jewish people at large. Tonight's presentation will be both unique and I think somewhat different from the other two, in the sense that our focus tonight on the legacy of Rav Steinseltz is perhaps the leader who most of us knew the least about, but was equally magnificent in his own personality, in his own scholarship, and his contribution to Jewish thought, to Jewish literacy, and to Jewish education. And for that reason, tonight's program is the perfect capstone to this incredible series. Before we begin, I want to thank the Sugarmans for their generosity in supporting this program and their inspiration behind so much of what we do for adult education at the RJC. A special thank you to our education committee, to Jeff Cronish and to Rivka Falk for all of their work for this program and all they do for adult ed at the RJC, and in particular for helping tonight's program take shape. I want to thank our very own Mr. Lou Bravman for helping us. I know he was a dear friend of Rabbi Steinseltz, and to have his contribution in making this program what it is tonight, we are incredibly grateful, and to see him and his family with us tonight is very, very special. I'm going to introduce our presenter this evening, but encourage you to stay with us from beginning to end. We are very honored to have Yeshiva University's President Emeritus Richard Joel with us this evening, a dear friend who needs, I think, very little introduction on this Zoom call. No, he says nothing. Even while he's muted, he is communicating with me. I think the only fact about President Joel that is important to review is that I was a Yeshiva University student during his presidency. That's the most important thing to be said. A tremendous influence on me and my cohort, my classmates during our time, and continues to be a great source of inspiration and leadership and motivation to all of us. So we are incredibly honored for us and for all of Riverdale and for everyone who's here tonight. We'll have some personal reflections from President Joel about his relationship with Rabbi Steinseltz in just a little while. Our guest this evening from the other side of the country is a very special one. And those who know me will know that I haven't traveled very far in my life. Between Baltimore and Riverdale is approximately 200 miles. And I think that's what Rabbi Alush probably travels for breakfast. He is an international figure and rabbinic leader whose journey began in Toulouse, who lived with his family in South Africa. And from South Africa, they made Aliyah to Israel. But more importantly, for us tonight, he was an early student of Rabbi Steinseltz in his yeshiva Mikor Chaim, and then continued learning with him in advanced yeshiva at Bat Ayin. So he has a close personal relationship as a student in the classroom of Rabbi Steinseltz from the earliest of ages into his advanced ages in receiving smicha. But in addition, Rabbi Alush went from Israel to Scottsdale, Arizona, and I want to take a minute to acknowledge, because I see many faces on the Zoom that are not familiar to us, that I think Arizona is well represented in this evening's Zoom program, where he serves and has served for the last decade as the rabbi of Congregation Beit Tfilah in Scottsdale, Arizona. And in that capacity, Rabbi Alush guides a growing and thriving Jewish community, an Orthodox community that embraces Ashkenazic and Sephardic tradition and embraces a very diverse and inviting approach to making Judaism meaningful and relevant for the Jewish community of Scottsdale today. And in that capacity, in addition to all the great work that he does, Rabbi Alush was also mentored and continued to seek inspiration from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, his Rebbe of many, many years. So it is a very unique privilege for us to be able to welcome a new voice to the RJC, and a voice that deeply understands the impact that Rabbi Steinseltz left on so many. One of the things that we try to accomplish in this series is to understand in the abstract what the theology of all these great teachers and leaders was, but we've also come to appreciate that it's the personal relationships that they had that will also endure for generations to come, the people that they touched in so many different ways. And to introduce us to, for those who didn't know him, or to help us better understand who Rabbi Adin Steinseltz was, it is an incredible privilege and honor for us to welcome Rabbi Pinchas Alus to the RJC this evening.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Zirkin, for those kind words. I was wondering if President Joel is so humble to not have any introduction, then you should have just mentioned my first name, Pinchas, because next to President Joel, I don't deserve an introduction at all. But thank you for that glorious introduction. The only thing is that I wish my mother was here. She would have believed you. But Rabbi Steinseltz, I know also was not a man who liked flattery and liked introductions. So I will, for next time, remain in his camp. And also, just for next time, you can know that you can introduce me just by my first name, Pinchas, and that's it. But thank you, anyhow, Rabbi Zirkin. Thank you, most importantly, for inviting me to this special evening. Thank you to all those who made it possible. I also want to thank my dear friends at Aleph, Lou Brovman and Margie Davis, who made this possible. I know who made the introduction. Thank you for that. And in general, thank you to each and every one of you, both from Scottsdale, Arizona, right here, and New York, for coming together to learn from this giant of man, this person who made a difference, not just in our generation, but I believe who made a difference for all generations to come. So I want to begin by just giving you maybe a short biography about Rabbi Steinseltz. I know that there are many people here I see in the list of participants that knew Rabbi Steinseltz, so I don't want to bore you too much with the biography, but I will try to weave in some personal stories, personal lessons, some teachings of Rabbi Steinseltz as I share about this giant of man. And hopefully this will give you also a better understanding, not just of what the person achieved, but who the person was at his very core, in his very life purpose. So the story of Rabbi Steinseltz really begins on July 11th, 1937. Or more particularly on the 3rd of Av in the Hebrew calendar. That's when he was born. He was born in Jerusalem, as many of you may know, to a secular family. Although I call them secular, I will mention what Rabbi Steinseltz told me about his parents, something that reverberates in my mind until this very day. He said that, yes, my parents were not, quote unquote, observant Jews, but I am more observant than my parents ever were. But my parents were more Jewish than I ever will be. And what he meant to say is that although observant, they were Jewish, proud, who fought for their rights to be Jewish in Europe and then afterwards. And that pride of their Jewish identity was certainly passed on to Rabbi Steinseltz. Maybe this is why much, much later on, he would tell me and audiences across the world that he has but one mission. And that mission was that there is a line, a verse that people say, yet they say that same verse with two different melodies. The verse is, I am a Jew. Some people say that verse or sing it with a very sad melody, as if they were saying, I have a genetic disease. I don't know what to do with it. I was born with it, but it's not something I'm proud of. And there are some people who say, I am a Jew, with a very joyous and proud melody, saying, I am a Jew, I'm proud of it, I am born to light up the world. And he summed up this little anecdote by saying that my mission is to go around the world and change the melody that is sour to the melody that is joyful. I want people across the world to say, I am a Jew, with the same joy and the same passion that my parents said it. And that's the family he was born in. Family that was very proud to be Jewish. A family also that taught him that education and asking questions is of vital importance to personal growth. And in his words, he said that his parents taught him to be skeptic about almost everything. And at one point he became so skeptic that he became skeptic of skepticism. being skepticism is what led him to be this quote unquote, I hate those labels, and so did Rabbi Steinseltz, secular young child, to explore his own traditions, his own heritage. And at the age of 14, he decided to go and enroll in a yeshiva, in a Chabad yeshiva in Lod, in Israel. This was all we found out after, not too long ago, but we found out after his passing, that this was all orchestrated by the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, a person who he had a very close, very intimate relationship with, and that relationship just grew over the years. But apparently the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote a letter to a Hasidic Jew who became one of Rabbi Steinseltz's mentors in Jerusalem when he was just 14 years old, a man by the name of Rabbi Steinseltz. And the Rebbe wrote to this man, Rabbi Steinseltz, there is a young man by the name of Adin who lives in Jerusalem, who has written a letter to me saying that he's distraught as to his pathway in life. And I'd like you to reach out to him, at least have someone reach out to him and start studying with him. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe already at that young age, at the age of when Rabbi Steinseltz was just 14 years old, already had an eye on young Adin Steinsaltz, and he, in a way, managed to send him teachers. And Rabbi Steinseltz, as mentioned, along with some other rabbis in Jerusalem, including Rabbi Dov Eliezerov, who was the chief rabbi of Katamon in Jerusalem, and much later on, Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman, who was the rabbi of Rabbi Steinseltz's yeshiva, the mashpia, the Hasidic guide in his yeshiva, became the mentors of Rabbi Steinseltz. He went, he studied, he continued to study secular studies. He was a chemist, as many of you may know too, not just a rabbi. And eventually, he also found that the school system was maybe a little suffocating for his growth, and he continued his growth solo. At the very young age of 21, he began began teaching the Talmud and also Hasidic teachings to many different study groups in Jerusalem, including to the president of Israel, President Shazar, who had a class on the book of the Tanya in the president's chamber in Jerusalem, where Rabbi Steinseltz was the teacher. Along with President Shazar, there were many other dignitaries like Hebrew University professors and others. And Rabbi Steinseltz was this young teacher teaching them. Much, much later on, in fact, I believe it is the very last video that Rabbi Steinseltz gave just before his stroke, 3 years before his passing. Rabbi Steinseltz speaks about those meetings with Shazar and the other dignitaries that he was teaching by saying that he was very humbled, and in a way he felt very uncomfortable to be teaching people who, in his words, could be his grandparents. And then it dawned on him that these people did not come to study from Rabbi Steinseltz, the man. They came to study the voice of Torah that was channeled through Rabbi Steinseltz. And then he made a simple mathematical calculation. He said, 1 second, the voice of Torah is 3,300 years old. So really, I am 3,321 years old, and these people are just about 67 years old. So I'm the oldest one in the room, and therefore I shouldn't feel uncomfortable. But this was already the first glimpse that we have into one of the great characteristics of Rabbi Steinseltz, maybe one of the more dominant ones, and that was his complete humility, his selflessness. He constantly saw himself, as mentioned, as this channel to the voice of Torah. He never wanted to superimpose himself, as many teachers do, on the teachings that he taught and add his own take or his own opinion. He was a channel for those voices, the voices of Torah that came from the Torah itself, or later on from the Talmudic sages, and so on and so forth. That was at the age of 21. 1965 was an important year for Rabbi Steinseltz when he was 28 years old. Number one, he married his wonderful wife, Sarah, may she be healthy and well, Sarah Azimov, who came from an illustrious Chabad family, and she was still is French of origin. And in 1965, Rabbi Steinseltz also established the Mechona Talmud, the institution for Talmudic studies, the institution that very soon after began to publish the Talmudic commentaries and translations of Rabbi Steinseltz himself, what has become the Talmud of the Jewish world. Now, Rabbi Steinseltz was single-handedly at first working on these Talmuds, on what is known until today as the Steinsaltz Talmud. The Steinsaltz Talmud was revolutionary because until Rabbi Steinseltz came, as we all know, the Talmud was a relic of the past or a possession that was held on very dearly by yeshiva students. And in fact, it could only be understood by yeshiva students because of the nature of the Talmud script, and at the same time, because of the language of the Talmud Aramaic. Rabbi Steinseltz came, as we all know, and he was the first one to do this, trailblazed the past for so many others later on who came to basically mimic him. He came and he not only translated the Talmud into Hebrew and then much later on to many other languages, but he also added his own commentaries, his own encyclopedic references. So whenever, for example, the Talmud speaks about anatomy, the anatomy of the body, then he has an encyclopedic reference speaking about that body part. He also added his own halachic references, which was truly revolutionary because many times when one studies the Talmud, he's left in the complete unknown. Okay, so we heard about this opinion and that opinion. What's the verdict? And here Rabbi Steinseltz comes and brings us the halacha in each and every page of the Talmud when it is relevant. And he worked on this, as mentioned, almost all by himself. At first, he really didn't have any help. Later on, people came, joined his team. It was a very small team. I believe it was because of the lack of funds, but Rabbi Steinseltz was relentless and he continued to work on it, and it took him 45 years until November 2010 to complete the whole Talmud. Now, in addition to, of course, the Talmudic commentary of Rabbi Steinseltz, he of course worked on many books that focused on Jewish thought, on social criticism, books that revolutionized many lives, countless lives. There are books that are deeply Kabbalistic, like the 13 Petaled Rules, and there are books that are more for the common man, like Simple Words. And there are books that are very intellectual and very maybe Talmudic, like the Essential Talmud or the Strife of the Spirit, and some of his other books that he wrote. So he wrote books really for anyone and everyone to access the beauty of Judaism and the very core of Judaism. That's the way Rabbi Steinseltz saw himself again, as a person who was obsessed to make Judaism both accessible to all and also relevant and meaningful for all, without, again, superimposing himself on any of the teachings that he conveyed. Now, Rabbi Steinseltz faced opposition, and I know that it's sometimes the elephant in the room. His Talmud was at one point burnt by some Jews. Why? They disagreed with the idea, or so they said at least, that Rabbi Steinseltz is taking the page of the Talmud and simply because of space reasons, in order to be able to insert his commentary, he changed the design of it, what's called the Tzurat Hadaf. And they gave him really so much trouble just for that. By the way, much later on, Rabbi Steinseltz revealed, again, a sign of his deep humility, revealed that it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory that told him how to design that page. Now, he never said that it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Why? Because he said, I'll take the fire, I'll take the heat. Let the Rebbe remain in peace. And again, so he took the heat for the Lubavitcher Rebbe because of the change of the design. Obviously, I believe, we can discuss this more, it was simply for jealousy reasons. But I will mention this, and I'm mentioning this mainly to make this point. I asked Rabbi Steinseltz whether this bothered him, that so many people were writing negatively about him. And in two different occasions, he gave me two different answers. One answer he gave me one time was that I really don't care what people write about me. I asked him why, and he said, because if it is true, then I already know it. And I probably know it from better sources than newspapers. If it is not true, then why read a lie? And that was one answer he gave me. Another answer he gave me is simply by quoting the Talmudic passage from the Tractate of Sota in, I believe, page 40a, Amud Aleph. I think that's the correct source. But he quoted Rabbi Abau, who was also known for his humility. And the Talmud says, well, can you give an example of Rabbi Abau's humility? And the story is of Rabbi Abau's wife, who met Rabbi Abau's Meturgeman's wife. The Meturgeman was the translator. In the times of the Talmud, the rabbis very often had weak voices, so they had a translator who would convey the voices, but of course they needed to be learned themselves. What they would do is they would bend down, listen to the rabbi speaking, and then convey those words to the crowd. So anyway, the wife of the Meturgeman of Rabbi Abau met the wife of Rabbi Abau in the marketplace, and they started speaking. Again, this is the answer of Rabbi Steinseltz to the question as if it bothers him that other people are opposing him. And they are speaking, these two wives, and at one point, the Meturgeman's wife tells the wife of Rabbi Abau, do you know, by the way, that my husband, the Meturgeman, the translator of your husband, doesn't need your husband. He can teach those teachings by himself. Now, Rabbi Abau's wife was deeply insulted. She went home and she told her husband, Rabbi Abau, did you hear how they're speaking about you, the Meturgeman and his wife? The Meturgeman's wife told me in the marketplace that her husband doesn't need you, that he can be the teacher himself. And Rabbi Abau, with his deep humility, responded to his wife, and what do you care? Mini umine it kalaseila. Whether it's from me or from him, let God be exalted. Doesn't matter, I'm just a channel. And in a way, that's the way Rabbi Steinseltz saw this opposition. If other people can mimic him, why not? That was his goal in the first place. Whether it's from me or from others, let God be exalted. That's the way he viewed that opposition. By the way, this opposition led him, I think, to a deeper relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe met Rabbi Steinseltz for the first time in 1970, even though, as mentioned, he had heard about him from the age of 14. He met him in 1970 because Rabbi Steinseltz served as the representative of President Shazar for a big Torah dedication that the Lubavitch movement had at the time on the 10th of Shvat, 1970. And Rabbi Steinseltz was there and he met the Rebbe. It's interesting to note that 12 days later, on the 22nd of Shvat, the Lubavitch Rebbe pens a letter to President Shazar saying, thank you for sending Adin Steinsaltz as your representative. And then he went on and on in this letter to say that he was deeply moved by meeting Rabbi Steinsaltz. He found in him many more qualities than what had been described to him. And he was tremendously, and he should tell Adin Steinsaltz, again, the Rebbe saying to President Shazar, you should tell Adin Steinsaltz not to be too humble, because being too humble can also harm you in the sense that it doesn't allow you to truly fulfill your mission all the way. Now, this is a letter, again, that has been published all around, and it's a letter, again, attesting to Rabbi Steinsaltz's humility. Many people, unfortunately, did not see that side in Rabbi Steinsaltz because Rabbi Steinsaltz could be very scathing. He was a man of truth who told things the way they were. And if you thought you were a big shot, he would tell you, he would tell you right there and then what he thought of you. And sometimes it was very, very, it seemed very insulting. So people thought that he wasn't that humble. But if you had the humility, and if you had really the true desire to get to know the man, you would, all of this was really a cover to his immense humility, to his ability to put himself in a way to the side so that he can convey those words of truth, whether they hurt or not, it didn't really matter for him, but so that he could convey those words of truth that he believed needed to be said, because he wanted people, again, to connect to that truth, the truth of God himself, that he was but channeling. Now, Rabbi Steinseltz and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as mentioned, had a very special relationship. And again, this opposition caused them to, I think, deepen their relationship. In 1990, it's important to mention this, Rabbi Steinseltz was going through many troubles, not just because of this opposition, but also because his own son, Manny, who now is the executive director of the Steinselds Center in Jerusalem, was very sick. He had leukemia. And in fact, the doctors didn't give him much chances to live. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe actually gave him a blessing 9 times of refuah shelema, and he was, thank God, healed. But during those times, the Rebbe instructed Rabbi Steinseltz on a Sunday morning, as Rabbi Steinseltz was receiving the blessing of the late Rebbe in New York City, in that famous line to receive dollars from the Rebbe. The Rebbe instructed Rabbi Steinseltz to change his last name from Steinseltz to Even Israel. To be more accurate, the Rebbe told him he could keep the name or the concept of Stein, which means Even, stone, and he should pick something else, not salts, not salt, maybe relating to the fact that salt might be too harsh. And indeed, he changed his name from Steinseltz to Even Israel, being a devout disciple of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He changed it officially in all of his documents. I know I saw his passports many times. That was changed, and it was changed at the entrance of his home. It doesn't say the Steinseltz family. And in fact, on his tombstone, the word Steinsaltz is not mentioned. It's the word Even Israel. In fact, another word is not mentioned. We know him as Rabbi Steinseltz, but the word rabbi is also not mentioned. Again, referring to his tremendous humility. Name is mentioned, is Adin, Even Israel. And that quote from the letter to President Shazar, that the Rebbe found in him many more qualities than that described, is also mentioned on his tombstone. That's a small biography. I want to go to the man himself, to what I believe really represented Rabbi Steinseltz, and who he was, not just in the eyes of the people who knew him, but also who he was through his books and through all the schools that instituted. We didn't speak about the schools that instituted in the 80s, and through all of the other endeavors and the lectures that he gave across the world. Before that, allow me to mention that my personal connection with Rabbi Steinseltz, and I'm speaking here from a very personal standpoint, and therefore I'm saying this, but my personal connection with Rabbi Steinseltz really started at the age of 8. I did not tell you this, Rabbi Zirkin, but I remembered that at the age of 8, my dear father took me to a lecture of his when we were living in Toulouse, France. And hall was packed, I remember. And at the very end of the lecture, I had a question, not necessarily an important question, but I had a question for Rabbi Steinseltz. And my father told me, you know what, at the end of the lecture, he's going to come down, go, run and ask him your question. And I ran and asked him my question. And I remember very clearly, very vividly, how Rabbi Steinseltz's eyes locked into my eyes. It was as if no one else existed. And I remember I was just an 8-year-old boy who barely spoke Hebrew. I tried to convey my question in Hebrew, by the way. And Rabbi Steinseltz said, you can speak French. Speak French. He understood French. I don't know if he spoke it, but he understood French. And I conveyed my question and I answered my question. I remember that then and there already something clicked. Much later on, at the age of 13 and a half, when my family eventually moved from South Africa to Israel, I was enrolled in the Mekor Chaim schools of Rabbi Steinseltz, where I stayed even after high school, joined Bat Ein, as was mentioned. And in those formative years, I developed a very strong relationship with Rabbi Steinseltz. He became my go-to guy, my mentor. And ever since, I have sought his advice on every decision I have made in life, small and big. In fact, I know that Margie's on the call and some others from Aleph here, they can attest to the fact that whenever Rabbi Steinseltz would come to this country, I would take a plane and meet him. I had to spend time with him, and I really visited communities with him everywhere, from Memphis, Tennessee, to San Francisco, California, to, of course, New York, Miami, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, and many others. So I was very, very close to him. And over the years, I noticed that there are characteristics that are so typical of Rabbi Steinseltz. One was mentioned, his complete selflessness and his humility And also the idea that he really never wanted any credit. In fact, as mentioned, he couldn't stand the fluffiness of people, the superficiality of people. I once asked him another personal anecdote. You know, I put it this way. I said, you know, every human being has their own personal dictionaries. We include words that we want and we omit words that we don't want. Some people omit the word hatred, which is good in most cases. Some people omit other words. What is a word that you just can't stand that is not found in your dictionary? And he responded without skipping a beat. I remember pretentiousness. I can't stand pretentiousness. And that was reflective of really of who he was. That's one characteristic we spoke of. But there's 3 or 4 others that I want to dwell on a little bit tonight. And that is that he was a man who really was not just, as the Time magazine called him, a once in a millennium scholar, or as Newsweek called him, a genius of the highest order, but a man who constantly knew how to see the big picture. Very often in my personal encounters with him, he would point something out that I had never seen before. And after he pointed out, it seemed so obvious because he was a man who really saw the whole picture. A quick anecdote, but he once called me, I remember I was 16 years old. And I was, you know, as a typical teenager, I was engrossed in my own self and in my own doubts. And he called me aside. This is in the Kolchem Yeshiva. It was back in Jerusalem. Today it's outside of Jerusalem in Kfar Etzion. But he calls me aside and he said to me, Pini, do you know what the difference is between a wise man and a fool? I said, no, what's the difference? And he said, it's very simple. A wise man makes the important, important, and the trivial, trivial. A fool makes the important trivial and the trivial important. And in a way, I think that was something that he embodied. He made the important, important, and the trivial, trivial. So he saw that big picture, you know, in the context of the times we live in. I want to mention that I once asked him, how come you don't write about politics? You write about so many other topics. I don't see you writing about politics. And he replied that I'm not a person who plants banana trees. I plant avocado trees. So what do you mean? He says, I'm not the type of farmer that plants fruit trees that are quick to grow so that I can have something to eat right now. I look at the big future. I want to plant trees so that people in 7 years from now, like the avocado tree, will have fruits to eat. That's what he did, I think, again, with his writings, with his institutions, with everything that he involved himself in. So he was a man, that was one thing. Another thing is that I believe that Rabbi Steinseltz, whether he insulted you or not, whether he was very harsh with you or not, and by the way, he was very harsh with me, and you needed humility, really, to withstand sometimes his harshness. I remember that when I was maybe 17 years old, there was a Hasidic Farbrengen led by Rabbi Steinseltz, a Hasidic gathering, and I went to ask him for personal advice. And Rabbi Steinseltz says, I can't speak to you right now. I said, why? He said, because no matter what I'll tell you, you won't listen to me. I said, I'm listening right now. He says, no, your mind is so full of bugs. You won't be able to listen to us. So he was very harsh. But on the other hand, I think that came from his deep, unconditional love to everyone. To really, as an 8-year-old boy, I felt that love. There were many adults in the room, maybe important, but I felt that he loved me for who I was, for the soul that I possessed. He loved you for who you were. And he was very much aware also of conveying this love in every opportunity he had. He wanted to really, in his words, infect people with that love. I'll never forget, and it's a story I've told also in New York, but I'll never forget how I was once walking with him in Times Square. And as you know, especially those from New York, in Times Square, before COVID, I don't know how Times Square looks today, but before COVID, Times Square is full of people giving out flyers. And as you may know, many of these flyers are completely inappropriate. And here I am walking with Rabbi Steinseltz from one meeting to another through Times Square, and people are handing him all of these flyers, and some of them are very, very inappropriate. But Rabbi Steinseltz is taking them. And at one point, I couldn't hold myself back, and I said, Rabbi Steinseltz, you don't need those flyers. Why are you taking them? And Rabbi Steinseltz says, you're right, I don't need those flyers. But the people that gave them to me, they need me to take those flyers. So what do you mean? He said, look, I know it works. They get a whole bunch of flyers to give out throughout the day. When they give out those flyers, when they finish their job, then they get their pay. So by me taking some of those flyers, I'm helping them get their pay a little bit quicker. So why not help a stranger with a little favor? And it taught me volumes, not just about this love that he had, but about this staying open to actualize every opportunity that is presented to you in order to indeed convey this love and infect people with that love. Was a lesson that truly I'll never forget. And I also saw him, cry so many times just because people were in pain. I sat with him when it was permitted for me, of course, with people that had very personal stories and very personal, moments of crisis. And he cried with them, literally cried with them. He felt you. He wanted to be there for you. And when he did that, you almost felt like, oh, someone else is feeling my pain. I'm relieved. I feel much better. Whether he gave you a good piece of advice or he remained silent, sometimes all he could do is cry with you. And that he did with tremendous love. So that's something that's worth mentioning. I think another thing that is worth mentioning is that Rabbi Steinseltz almost had an obsession to get to know you, to meet you where you were, in your terms. I remember being in a lecture with him, I think it was in San Francisco, it could very well be. And he was on stage and the lights were in his eyes and he couldn't see the crowd too well. And of course, he made sure to tell the MC just that. At the end of the lecture, I'm driving him to his hotel and I asked him, so was it successful in your eyes? Well, how do you think he did? He says, the truth is that I really don't know. I don't know if I was successful. I said, what do you mean? What tells you that? He says, look, those lights were in my eyes. I couldn't see people. And if I could not relate to them, I couldn't see their responses. So I don't know if it was successful. For him, it was not just about coming to deliver a message. It was about connecting to people and meeting them where they were. That he had really a knack of doing just that in the most beautiful way. And I remember being with him, I lived in Atlanta for 4 years. And I remember taking him to a preschool. And just another little anecdote. And the kids, the 5-6-year-old kids, were in the middle of their snack time. And this kid had a banana for snack. And Rabbi Steinseltz went to this kid and he spoke to him about the banana. Of course, Rabbi Steinseltz was a walking encyclopedia. He knew everything about anything about bananas and monkeys and chemistry, as mentioned. But he's talking to this young kid about bananas. And then at one point, he takes the peel of the banana and draws a little smiley at the very bottom of the peel and hands it back to this child. And he says to him, you see, even from garbage, you can make something great. And to me, it was, again, Rabbi Steinseltz being himself, not wasting any opportunity to make an impact, to connect to people where they were, and ensuring that even a 5-6-year-old boy could be touched by him and remember his deeply relevant lesson. That was Rabbi Steinseltz at his best. I will share with you something that it's quite personal also about Rabbi Steinseltz, but I have a dear friend here in our community who was a visionary of the big building that, thank God, we finished building some 2 years ago. And everyone is welcome, by the way, to Scottsdale. Rabbi Zirkin, please come with your family and with your community. We'd love to have you all. But this man's name was Bill Smith, and he had really a moment of epiphany in his life where he decided to become more and more connected to his Judaism. And I'm speaking to Rabbi Steinseltz a week before his stroke in his office in Jerusalem. And Rabbi Steinseltz tells me that he believes wholeheartedly that everyone is on a trajectory to teshuvah, or to reconnecting to the deeper self. And sometimes it's just that people die too soon, but everyone is on a trajectory to doing teshuvah. And he was speaking about this man, Bill Smith. And then he told me a story that again makes this point. He said that he was once in a TV panel in Israel in the 60s. And part of the panel was him, the Moshe Sneh, and then some other guy, I can't remember his name, but he told me about Moshe Sneh. Moshe Sneh is the father of Ephraim Sneh, who was a Knesset member not too long ago. I think the Minister of Transportation also. No matter what, but Moshe Sneh was a man who was very, very interesting. And as Rabbi Steinseltz told him, this is Rabbi Steinseltz telling me the story, told him during the break of this TV panel, he said, Moshe, you remind me of some other Zionist, of a guy named David Rosenbaum. David Rosenbaum, he tells Moshe Sneh, was a man who was first a deep communist, and then he became a deep Zionist, and then he became part of Aguda, the very ultra-Orthodox group of Israel, and he was a deep Haredi, very committed to that lifestyle. And he told Moshe Sneh, half jokingly, half not. I don't think there were any jokes really. Rabbi Steinseltz is a man of great humor, but I don't think he told jokes just for nothing. But he told Moshe Sneh, so tell me, Moshe, you are very similar. You were a deep communist, and now you're a very staunch Zionist. When is step 3 coming? And then with tears in his eyes, Rabbi Steinseltz tells me that Moshe Sneh came to him and said to him, please don't say anything. But you know, I don't like religion. I don't like religious people, but it's much closer. This third step is coming. It's much closer than you think. A year later, Moshe Sneh wrote a letter to Rabbi Steinseltz asking that he be buried al pi halacha according to Jewish law. And he asked Rabbi Steinseltz to guarantee that. And in fact, when he died, Rabbi Steinseltz guaranteed just that. And he said, you see, that proves my point. Everyone is on that trajectory. That's the way he saw you. He believed in you sometimes more than you believed in yourself. And therefore had this obsession to connect with you, to help you grow and to help you have faith in yourself, at least as much as he had it in you. I know I'm almost running out of time, and I can go on and on and on. But I do want to conclude with 2 separate documents and then one little video. One document is the last will of Rabbi Steinseltz. Now, this last will has a story in and of itself, but apparently, and I'm sure Margie can tell you more details about this, but apparently in 1980, circa 1980, Rabbi Steinseltz faced a life-threatening surgery. The doctors himself, and I know Rabbi Steinseltz told me about that surgery, and he told me that the doctors had told him that you have a 50% chance of living. Now, they don't want to perform it immediately because the doctor had some life issues to take care of. So they waited simply for the doctor. So he had some time to think about the surgery. And during that time, he decided to write a last will, what's called in Hebrew, tzava'ah. And in that tzava'ah, I think he encapsulated, knowingly or not knowingly, his very raison d'etre, as they say in French, his very reason of being. It's a tzava'ah that was shared with us by the family shortly after the passing of Rabbi Steinseltz. And I want to share it with you so that, again, we can connect to the great man that was and in a way continues to be. So I want to share my screen. I can, right, Rabbi Zirkin? Yeah, I'm a co-host. Good. There we go. Share. Okay, so here it is, and we can read it together. To my family and my friends, here are a few matters that have occupied my mind and captured my heart. With all sincerity and candor, I always sought the welfare of the Jewish people, and are designed to form a bond between the Jewish people and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God, blessed be his name. This desire filled my heart, and for this sake and to achieve this goal, I accomplished all that I've accomplished. My actions were perhaps self-oriented, but I loved the Jewish people, and I loved God with earnestness and with all my heart. I sought these 2 loves, and I acted for their sake. May not have been adequate, but I acted with all my heart. I leave you with a few requests. All material things of honors and tributes are of no interest to me and have never preoccupied me. However, I do have a request from all my friends whom I love and who love me. 1, help raise my children in the way which we desire. Jews are complete in the ways of God and man, who walk in the path of Hasidism, and who always remember to love the Jewish people in spite of their shortcomings, as well as every individual Jew. Let them strive to become acquainted with the world without fear, but with the only goal of illuminating it with the light of life. And here is another request for everyone else, and of course this applies to all of us. I wanted to accomplish many, many things. Believe me, it was not for my own glory. A fire burnt within me for the sake of God and for the sake of Mashiach, his anointed one. If I knew that others were accomplishing this work better than I would have retreated to a modest corner. God is my witness. I never imposed myself, nor did I ever push myself forward in order to seek honor or power or anything that may resemble them. But I wanted to accomplish many, many things. I beg you, fulfill the tasks which I sought to undertake. Continue to accomplish all that will strengthen the bond between the God of Israel and the people of Israel, the entire world and the Torah, that these four will remain inseparable like the four letters of God's ineffable name. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He is the one who knows for all eternity. Okay, so yeah, we see beyond, of course, all of these characteristics, Rabbi Steinseltz says strong desire to affect people, as mentioned, to make people grow because, again, he believed in us. He believed in the infinite potential that we each have. One last document that I'd like to share if I have time. Rabbi Zirkin, we're good? One last document I'd like to share, and then just a little 56-second clip. But this is a document that was also discovered or rediscovered just a few weeks ago. Rabbi Steinseltz left many, many manuscripts behind. By the way, in that meeting just before the stroke, Rabbi Steinseltz told me that he has plans for the next 150 years. This was a 78-year-old man, that he had plans for the next 150 years. And I said to them, can I see them? I said to Rabbi Steinseltz, can I see them? Where are they? He said, yes, they're somewhere in this office, but I don't show them to anyone. I said, why not? He said, people are going to think I'm crazy. So I don't show them to anyone. But yeah, again, teaching us something quite amazing. And that is that Rabbi Steinseltz, as driven as could be, he did not waste any moment. And he had many, many plans, a lesson in and of itself. But here's another document. This document is a document that I like to not just read, but it's a document I'd like to, in a way, pray with you. Pray from this document with you. Why? Because it is a prayer that Rabbi Steinseltz wrote at the tender age of 19 years old. He encouraged us students and many others to write their own prayers. Beyond the text of the Siddur, he wanted us to speak in a very personal way to God. And of course, he practiced what he preached. So he wrote his own prayers. This is one of, I'm sure, of the many prayers that he wrote. But again, it's a prayer that speaks volumes about this giant of man. And I have personally incorporated this prayer each and every day in my own davening, in my own prayer. It's just a wondrous prayer and speaks about his Weltanschauung, as they say, or his world philosophy. So let's pray these words together again in loving memory and in honor of Rabbi Steinseltz. Grant me the merit, my God, to love all your creatures. Grant me the merit to love every Jew without limit and reservation. Grant me the merit to discern through my own flesh that my Jewish brothers and sisters and I are one soul, although our bodies are distinct from each other. Imbue in my heart a spirit of greatness so that I will not be trapped by the pettiness that may surround me, so that I will not be diminished by vain vexations, and so that my heart will not be distracted by those who act with iniquity. Grant me the merit to always remember that the trivialities of life and the evil doings in which my brethren, the children of Israel, are sometimes enmeshed, are a falsehood that is as fleeting as a shadow, and that the good in their soul is true and everlasting. Grant me the merit, my God, each and every day of my life, to fulfill the following verse with mindfulness and passion. I have set the Lord before me always. And as the Baal Shem Tov explained, that the many transient events in my life are all equal to me, whether I'm disparaged or honored, whether I fail or succeed, whether I'm in state of happiness or, God forbid, in a state of sadness. I will always remember that in every situation, in every circumstance, I am submerged in the divine flow. Imbue in my heart the ability to perceive certainty within uncertainty, the straight path within the crooked paths, and beyond all these, the revelation of the divine within myself and within the universe. Grant me, my God, to unite the quintessence of my soul with the quintessence of the Torah, the power of my intellect with the intellect of the Torah, and the ways of my life with the ways of the Torah. Instill in my mind the wisdom to comprehend the depths of the wisdom of your Torah. Imbue in my heart the ability to sense with all my bones how the Torah unites and integrates with the world. Grant me, my God, the fortitude, these are powerful words, to remove the imaginary partition between the Torah and the world. I will then contemplate your Torah and see in it your world. I will then contemplate your world and see in it your Torah. Finally, grant me the merit, my God, to never be anxious and afraid to savor your world. Imbue in my heart the courage to relish every material and spiritual pleasure. till I've extracted from them the fullness of the divine light that lies hidden within them. Strengthen and support me so that my feet do not stumble, so that my state of mind remains clear and free of confusion, as I strive with persistence to become one and converge with the source of your pleasures. Awake and fill my heart with immense joy and unleash from within me the forces of life. Flood my innermost being with gentle streams of celestial delights, so that I love your world. May the deep azure of the sky, the breeze of the spring, and the hiss of the green leaves chant divine melodies that tell the story of your glory. Right, friends, I want to conclude just with a 50 seconds clip, as mentioned, of Rabbi Steinseltz speaking about his grand life mission. And hopefully those words will reverberate in our ears and propel us also to grow more, to act more, to do more, because no matter how much we've done, we can and should always do more and more and more. Here is this 50-second clip that I was speaking about. Just a second. There we go.
Some books, some of the things that I have written, pieces, have the ability to make people move. And that is what I really want to do. I'm not interested in writing about history or politics or these things. I mean, if I can make a person just say being touched, and not only touched, touch is a small and shallow feeling. I'm saying that I can make people jump from this place to another place. If I did it, I did something good.
All right, and this was the same Rabbi Steinseltz who said that if one person moves forward, a good thing happens. But if 1 million people take one step forward, then the whole world shakes. And that's what he wants. So friends, let's take one step forward, each in our own journey, and make the whole world shake. And then Rabbi Steinseltz will shake with us and smile at us from the heavens, no doubt.
Thank you, Rabbi Alush, for your beautiful presentation this evening. What I'd like to do with the time that we have is turn it over to President Joel for his reflections at this time. If anyone has questions that they would like to ask either to Rabbi Alush or to President Joel, now would be a great time to enter them into the chat box. Thank you. President Joel, we're going to unmute you.
There we are. Thank you, and thank you, Rabbi Alush, for enlightening us and for bringing us into the circle of intimacy that you enjoyed with Rabbi Steinsaltz. When Rabbi Zirkin asked me if I would speak a few days ago, I told him that if he wants me to do that, I will do it for no more than 2 or 2.5 minutes. So now let's see if I'm actually honest. It's been my great pleasure in life to have had the zechus to know and learn from Rabbi Norman Lamb, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Zichronam Livracha. And I often tell Esther, I don't know how I had the zechus to be able to have that kind of contact. And I think it's wonderful that Rabbi Zirkin, you and Riverdale Jewish Center have really said, let's think on this, because you could either say it's been a devastating year because we lost to 3 of them, or you could say somehow we are being challenged to look at the collective and harmonious visions of these 3 great leaders and say, how does it sustain us and provoke us? And I think of that often. I also want to say that my dealings with Rabbi Steinsaltz go back to 1990, and he is all the things that Rabbi Alush said, but I have to say that a lot of his journey has been facilitated by the real loving kindness of Margie Ruth Davis, who was at his side doing all the work that he didn't want to do, always representing him with love and with dignity, and it was clearly a work of passion. And in that way, I think the work of the Aleph Society is still so urgent because his voice needs to keep being heard. I also will tell you that our friend and my beloved friend, Lou Brovman, was very close to him and always was a source of strength to him, and always found opportunities for me to be with him, which I'll always be grateful for. And we should all struggle with the philosophy of life that they all taught us. I knew, see, I don't believe that Rabbi Steinsaltz subscribed to a two-dimensional Judaism, even though so much of his fame is about the two dimensions of the text that he informed and illuminated. Right? But he was a man of text and context. He was a three-dimensional man. And it was as important for him to touch people and engage in life and in some ways celebrate life as it was for him to write the incredible works that will inform us and our children for the next millennium. And you all know as well as I do the depth and the scope and the import of those works. So I just want to share, just unrelated, 2 or 3 vignettes of my dealings with him. I first encountered him when he agreed to participate in a national video. This is in the 90s, so it was an interesting thing. A national video, a hookup with many different Hillels, so that students could hear Rabbi Steinsaltz ask questions and encounter him. And he was incredibly willing to do it. We gathered at a studio at NYU, and we began the process. And he took time, as many of you know. If you would ask a brief question, there was no such thing as a brief answer for Rabbi Steinseltz. He would tell you all the things, not that you wanted to hear, but that he wanted you to hear. So it was an interesting thing to deal with students who came from nowhere, but were told that this is a millennial thinker. I noticed as the program was going on that he was writing on a tablet, on the old time tablets, these tablets. And I was looking, and during a break, I said, Rav Steinseltz, what are you doing? He says, I'm doodling. I said, what are you doodling? He said, well, I doodle pictures of mice and cats. And I looked down at the page, and there was a page filled with these wonderful doodles of mice and cats. When the evening was over, I actually took the piece of paper and went to him and asked if he would autograph it. So if I can ever find it, you can all come and see an original Steinsaltz of mice and of cats. But he was just always willing to speak on different campuses, and his brilliance and his openness and his challenge was refreshing to students, because they saw that he was earnest enough and open enough, frankly, to assault them and to challenge them. And you could see the love in his eyes, which were always glinting, and you could even see in that small excerpt that you saw. But he went around the country to different places with me, and he did it, as they said, always with modesty. I remember when he spoke to several birthright groups in Jerusalem. He once spent Shabbos with us and spoke to birthright groups. It was important for him that they know that there was substance to Yiddishkeit, that it was depth, that it was layered, and that was really wonderful. His son, Meni, became a dear friend, and in fact, after his recuperation, Rabbi Steinseltz urged that Meni come and work at Hillel, for Hillel's sake and for Meni's sake. And he spent a few years at the University of Maryland, Hillel, doing work with all the students there, and we were enriched by it, and I think he was as well. In 2001, I was selected for my sins, I believe, to chair an investigation of abuse at a national Jewish organization. I came to it with trepidation, and once I started working on this with the committee that I had, I was barraged by people pleading with me not to go forward with this, and certainly never to speak publicly about it, and never make this public. And I would inquire why, because this was an investigation into serious wrongdoing. And they said, because it will create Lashon Hara. And people I respected said this. And I was at a certain point saying, what is this that I'm doing? I was then the president of Hillel. We lived in Washington. And I was very troubled by it and very troubled by what I was learning. So I asked to have an appointment with Rabbi Steinseltz when he was in America. And I had an evening appointment with him in his hotel in Manhattan. And I went to meet, I had met him already and we were friendly. I loved the fact that we were friendly. And I told him about all the work I was doing with this investigation and all the serious matters that we were dealing with. And I told him I was very concerned that I was doing the wrong thing. And did he have any guidance to give me? And he said two things to me. First, he said, the principle of what you're dealing with is ubiyarta hara mikirbecha, that you have to expunge the evil from within our midst. And as far as Lashon Hara, let me tell you this, he said, truth is the shield of Torah. And you have to tell the truth. And I must tell you, it gave me great chizuk in moving forward and in fact, in doing that. Two more brief things. When I assumed the YU presidency, he asked to see me and he came to my office at YU and we were chatting nicely. And then he said, well, I've come to give you Musar. I said, okay. He said, you must make sure that Yeshiva University does not become Haredi. You have to make sure that it sustains the principles of modern Orthodoxy. He said it in somewhat more spicy terms than that. I was trying to report to him that his sense of Harediism at Yeshiva was somewhat misplaced, which it was, but he didn't want to hear it. And he just kept making the point. Finally, I thanked him, told him I would listen. And I think I did my part, as did other people at Yeshiva, to make sure that it remains the kind of light that it is to the world. The last thing I'll share with you is in the year, I think it was 2000, we both were at the General Assembly of the Council of Jewish Federations, which is the gathering of the princes and princes of Israel in the United States. And I was asked to chair a session where I would interview and take questions from the audience with Rabbi Steinseltz. We got to the appointed place. As I usually did when I would share these things, sometimes Lou talked me into these, I would ask Mechila of him that I wasn't just going to sit quietly, but I would interrupt him. And he gave me permission. And we got to this room and there were 900 people there waiting to hear him. So we took all kinds of questions and answers. It was a nice event. At one point, I turned to him and said, Rabbi Steinseltz, we are also very concerned about the price of assimilation and how we are to deal with this plague of assimilation. What should we do with the young people who are so assimilated? How do we affect them? And he turned to me in the audience and he said, don't worry. He said, every Jew has a Nikud Yehudi, das Pinta Yid, has a little bit of a Jew in him, and it will come out at the right time. And I said, these are one of the times that I'm going to ask your forgiveness. I'm going to push back. That's very nice if we believe that each person will live for 500 years. But the data is showing us that that's not happening and that people are not being involved. Give me a better answer. So he looked at me and he got that unique twinkle in his eye. And he said, all right, I'll tell you this. Ta'amu ura'u ki tov. Now the pasuk in Tehillim is Ta'amu ura'u ki tov Hashem, that you should taste and see that God is good. His message was, do you want to know how to affect people? Let them taste Yiddishkeit. Let them, it's a very Lubavitch message, but it's also a very YU message. Let them taste it and they will see that it was good. He was a man who was intent on feeding and nurturing the minds and the hearts and the souls of the Jewish people, and we were all better for it. Tehei Zichro Baruch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Joel, so very much for those beautiful vignettes and memories of who he was. I have at least two questions that I want to take advantage of for the opportunity to ask. The first one may be a little bit longer. So Rabbi Alush, if you can briefly, people are curious about the attempt to resuscitate the Sanhedrin. If you would be willing to share a comment or two about it, about Rabbi Steinsaltz's attitude to it, and it's the whole enterprise, if you could.
Sorry, Rabbi Zorkin, you're gonna have to repeat that. My internet connection was unstable for a second. Go ahead.
The question was about Rabbi Steinsaltz's involvement with the attempt to resuscitate the Sanhedrin.
Oh.
Tell us a little bit about the history of that and his impressions of it.
Sure. I mean, I asked Rabbi Steinseltz about it myself. And So there was an attempt, for those of you who don't know, but there was an attempt to revive the Sanhedrin that once upon a time existed some 2,300 years ago in the times of the temple, with Rabbi Steinseltz being the head of it. And Rabbi Steinseltz was asked to serve as the Av Beit Din and to stop making halachic rulings and so on. And I asked Rabbi Steinseltz, so really, do you see yourself as this new head of the Sanhedrin? And is this something you want to do? He said, no, I'm doing a favor to an old friend. I really don't want to do it. So I said, why don't you just quit? He said, I want to see where it goes. I like people with big dreams. And I want to see where it goes. And it didn't go very well. And eventually, I think it just crumbled. But there were two big lessons in that short answer. One lesson is that, you know, sometimes if you owe a debt of gratitude, then you do it whether you want it or not. But secondly, I like people with big dreams. Rabbi Steinseltz loved people with big dreams. And he encouraged people to dream. No matter how crazy your dream was, he wanted you to dream, and he preferred people with crazy dreams than people with no dream at all. Just a short anecdote. I remember being with him. Margie also facilitated this meeting for me. And indeed, thank you, Margie, for everything that you did for Rabbi Steinseltz. It's just remarkable beyond words. But this man that I knew very well came to Rabbi Steinseltz's office in New York, and he said, look, Rabbi Steinseltz, the source of the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is Temple Mount. If we can promise the Palestinians that no Beit Mikdash, no temple will fall on them, and that will forever respect their holy site, then there'll be peace. And in fact, I came up with an idea. The idea is to build a bridge over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, so that if the temple does fall from the heavens, or if we decide to build it, it will be built on that bridge. And the bridge will have a pillar that connects the temple to the ground itself, so halachically it will be okay. What do you think, Rabbi Steinseltz? Rabbi Steinseltz, to my astonishment, said, yes, that's a good idea. Yeah, go for it. I mean, yeah, do what you need to do. Speak to the Saudis. And at the end of the meeting, the man left. I said, Rabbi Steinseltz, what's happening here? And he said, no, I like people with big dreams. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask one other question that was posed, and I think it was great. You know, with each of the personalities, with each of these great leaders that we're reflecting on, so one of the questions that people have been asking me is, could we recommend books that they had written that we should be reading? Now, for each of them, I mean, we could spend the rest of our lives. Someone said, oh, we should have a course on Chief Rabbi Sachs. We should have a course on Rabbi Lamb. We could. I mean, it would take us that 150 years. But someone asked tonight, I like the way they formulated this question to me, which is, what would you say might be, for those who want to get to know him better, Rabbi Steinsaltz's most revealing work, the one that speaks most to his essence?
That's a very tough question. It depends on the person asking. Really, it depends. Rabbi Steinseltz has so many different types of books. I will say this, there is a book that changed people's lives profoundly. I give a class on it. I know Arthur Kurzweil is on the call, gives a brilliant class on it. And he's much more knowledgeable about this book than I am. But it's called The 13 Petaled Rules. It's a book on Kabbalah, but it's very soul-stirring and awakening. I will say this, if you do read that book, Rabbi Steinseltz himself told me that you should start from chapter 3. We tell people to start with chapter 3. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 are very esoteric, speak about the 4 worlds and so on, so start from chapter 3. But that's one book if you're looking for something soulful and very, transformative, maybe that's the word. Another easy read, I mentioned the book Simple Words. I personally love that book. And that's a book that's a very easy read, and that also conveys Rabbi Steinseltz's being in a very strong way. One last book, that's, he wrote over 60 books. One last book that comes to mind is a recent book called The Soul. A tremendous book. If you want to get to know yourself, then read The Soul. And there you'll discover not just yourself, but also Rabbi Steinseltz too.
That comment reminded me of There's a legend, I believe it is accurate and well documented, that when the Vilna Gaon was asked his opinion of the Mesilas Yesharim, which is a course we just finished at the RJC, he said that the Ramchal was meticulous in the first 11 chapters. So beginning at chapter 3, I don't know what the Vilna Gaon meant. There's, I think, a lot of research on what happens in Perek Yud Aleph and Mesilas Yesharim, but that's what they say. So begin it in Perek Gimel. You heard it here first. So if I may, President Joel, if you'll honor us, final question for the evening. You had a very unique privilege in your life to engage with all three of the terrific Gedolim, authors, teachers, and mentors that we have been studying and reflecting on. And I think one of the things that will be interesting for those of us who had the privilege to meet them is to reflect on the difference between knowing them as people and knowing them through the works that they wrote. So we're in this very difficult, sad, and crucial moment where we're bridging the gap between the generation that knew them and the generations that will read them. So if maybe down the road, someone will watch this conversation on YouTube and think about, the relationship between these books and the people that they touched in their lives, what would you want those readers to know about these incredible figures?
Well, I think to a degree, it's been said. First of all, they all profoundly cared. I don't think they were sacrificing their lives. They were investing their lives. And they really, really cared about making a difference for Klal Yisrael and beyond. And in many ways, they had similar journeys. I would tell you that all of them, frankly, on a personal level, were pretty shy. I'm not sure that any of them really loved being in the crowd. There's also knowing the private Jonathan Sacks and the public Jonathan Sacks. They were not at war with each other, but there are times when you have to be on. I think they cared very deeply. I think their writings were critically important to them, but didn't define them in their entirety. And I think the beauty is that you can look at their lives as well as their works and see the same people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. By way of closing, maybe in response to that, a beautiful observation, something that I tell people about my time being on the Upper West Side and being at the Jewish Center with Rabbi Lamb is one of the greatest, many of the great images of Rabbi Lamb were his time behind the pulpit and his time at the presidency at Yeshiva, etc. But one of the greatest images you could ever have of Rabbi Lamb and Mindy Lamb, Zichronim Livracha, was if you ever had the zchus to walk through Central Park on Shabbos afternoon, you would see the two of them sitting side by side at a random park bench right around 87th, 88th Street, reading the newspaper side by side.
That's right.
And you experience two people, their deep love for one another, their deep curiosity, and the way that they embraced Shabbos as for lives that I'm sure were very, very busy, and they carried a lot of the weight of their community and the world on their shoulders. They just sat and they enjoyed Shabbos and they read together and they loved it. And what I hope in closing this terrific series is that we who had the privilege of knowing them or knowing or learning from those who knew them personally will be able to fuse these two aspects of these incredible, incredible thinkers, that they were real people, that they were religious in their, not only in their personal lives, but in the investment that they had in Klal Yisrael. And we lived through a tremendous generation. Ashreinu, it's such a privilege that we knew them, that we learned from them, and we will carry their works with us as a memory of the great lives that they led. My hope is that we will continue to reflect on their legacy for years to come, and I have no doubt that they will inspire us in our own personal lives and in our community's direction for many, many years to come. I want to thank our guests tonight. Thank you to President Joel. Thank you to Rabbi Alush for taking the time to join us to make this final session so meaningful. Thank you to one and all for joining us throughout this series. Please join us consistently going forward. Our education program at the RJC has really been a source of pride for us during COVID. Please stay connected with our shul and our opportunities to learn together. But more importantly, we hope everyone is home and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you back at the RJC very soon. Have a wonderful evening to one and all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.